So I think we're all familiar with each other by now, but my name is Alex and I'm a PhD student in engineering here at the University of Alberta. And today I want to talk a little about limb replacements and enhancements now in the future and considerations we should take along the way as technology progresses. So to give an overview of what I'll be talking about today, I'm going to start with joint repair and restoring joint function, and then talk about where we are now and where we're going in the future, and then talk about replacement methods using robotics again now and in the future, and then some considerations that we should have with current technology and as technology progresses. So joint function can be compromised for a number of reasons, injury or illness being quite common. And over the years, our methods of improving joint function have drastically evolved. So they have come from methods of fusion. So this is a slide showing different ankle joint repairs. So from fusion, which really limits your motion, to full joint replacements, to custom-made prosthetics that say replace a whole bone. So even though these methods have improved over the years, there's still a lot of limitations with them. Patients have functional limitations, so limiting themselves to low impact. They are also at risk for injury around the prosthesis, and prosthesis can come loose or wear down over time. So even the best current methods still have a long way to go when talking about joint function. So a big step I see in the future with these methods is using more biological materials. So a lot of the issues around injury around the prosthesis is because we have two disparate materials that don't go well together. So as research in tissue engineering and stem cells continue to grow, we'll be coming closer and closer to creating replacements that are compatible with our bodies, and then even further on in the future, figure out ways that our bodies can repair themselves either wholly or faster. And so these two images, which are sort of hard to see, the one on the right is a 3D printed neocartilage tissue, and the one on the left is a grown human bone in a lab. So we're already getting to the point where these are coming close to reality for implementation. So if we could restore ourselves to normal, that would be awesome. But what would be even better is if we could restore ourselves to better than normal or enhance ourselves to better than normal. So in near sci-fi movies, they talk about cellular regrowth and therapy, and this is the healing bed that was in the movie Elysium. So once we get to the point that we can heal ourselves, there's not much difference from that to being able to biologically enhance ourselves to be stronger, faster, or just better versions of what we currently are now. So this could be the way of the future for restoring. So now going into replacing, so this is sort of the other side. Most of this is right now limited to people that have amputations or have been born without limbs. And there's been an evolution with this technology as well. So if we just look at the lower limbs, so the leg, we've come a long way from peg legs to this cheetah leg that you can see to a full robotic leg that are changing lives for those who need them. So one patient who had the robotic leg said it's come to the point where movement is now personal. So it feels like not quite the same as being real, but it's getting to that point. So this video here is a man, and he has two lower limb robotic prosthetics, and he is running on, if you can tell, pretty rugged terrain. So I have bad ankles, and for me to run up and down this, I'd probably end up hurting myself. Someone that had an ankle replacement would almost certainly have trouble navigating this terrain. But robotics has gotten to the point when, for some functions, it's actually better than internal replacements. So that's just a video to show you, how far that has already come for current technology. So if we're already here now, where this could go in the future seems limitless, but there's still a lot of gaps that need to be closed between what we have now and what would be ideal for the future. So these include, but aren't really limited to, proprioception, fine motor control, which is improving a lot, dexterity, but most importantly, touch sensitivity. And so I'm talking about if I touch my arm, how that feels, but also if you touch my arm, how that feels to you. So it's going to have different feelings. So that's one gap that's really still fairly large right now. After these issues are resolved, the possibility of enhancing our limbs using robotics is huge. We have infinite possibilities. Amy Mullins and Hugh Hare are already two people that use their robotic or non-robotic and just regular prosthetic limbs to get a different look or a different function. So once this comes to a point that maybe we're doing this electively, we could have endless possibilities. You could have a telescoping arm. You could have an arm that doesn't conduct electricity, say you're an electrician. So there are a lot of options that we can have for this technology. So now that we've sort of looked at where we are mostly now and maybe have some ideas of where these could go in the future, I think it is pretty safe to say that as technology progresses, people with joint injuries may have a choice to restore their joint or replace their joint. And that will have to do a lot with the speed at which each technology progresses. So if robotics really take off in compared to the biological alternative, you may have people deciding that they would rather have a more functional robotic limb than a biological limb. So this is a quote that I found while I was doing my research, and it's by Stephen Hawking, and he says, "Shockwaves of progress are heading our way. With technology at our disposal, the possibilities are unbounded. Our greatest hopes could be realities in the future." So this is a really good quote for the technology in this course in general, but specifically when I apply it to what I'm looking at, it brings me to my next question. Maybe your greatest hope or something that you would be really interested in doing is running super fast or jumping super high, having more than one arm, having a telescoping arm. Maybe that's of interest to you, maybe it's not, but either way, with progress we're making, it could become a very real choice that we're able to make at some point in the future. So currently, there are considerations that we have to take into account, and especially as technology progresses, we'll have to consider these things, and when replacing or repairing joints and limbs, and those are function, emotional impact or psychological impact, economics, and ethics in society. And I'm sure you could find others. These are the four that I kind of focused on. So the first one is function. So function is really a lot of what's driving the technology right now. If you lose a limb and you want to replace it, you would like it to do what it did before. And a lot of that is focused on mobility right now, because when we think of what our leg does, if you were to ask someone, they'd probably be, well, it lets me walk. What does your arm do? It lets you pick up things, do things. So mobility is huge, but you can't take away from things like touch sensitivity, proprioception, fine motor skills. So we need to take all of these into account when considering these technologies. So if we can step sort of out of where we are now and to the point where maybe we can grow new limbs, we can repair and enhance limbs easily, our robotic limbs that we've created have now interfaced with our bodies close to seamlessly. I'm not sure, I'm confident that it will ever be perfect. There's still going to be a trade-off in restoring or enhancing function and replacing. So for example, robotic limbs will allow us to do things that I think we couldn't hope to do biologically. To have a go-go gadget arm, I mean, if someone found a way to biologically be able to do that, that would be super cool. I don't really see it going in that direction. So robotic limbs will allow us to do things that we can't biologically. However, I don't know that robotics will fully ever close the gap when it comes to touch sensitivity, so being able to touch and feel and how you feel. So I'm not sure that that will ever be on an equal level as a biological limb. So those will be some gaps, trade-offs in function that one might have to consider in the future if people electively decide to enhance themselves biologically or robotically. Enhanced functions, we could be stronger, faster, jump higher, heal faster, and do different things with different types of limbs. Emotional and psychological impact when altering a body is obviously a big concern. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of that, but patients that currently undergo these procedures have a lot of negative emotions, and that's understandable. Nobody's really electively, that I know of, choosing to cut off a limb and replace it with a robotic one. So the people that have these procedures now are doing it because they don't have a choice. So current issues with this are depression, anxiety, low self-esteem. But as the technology gets better, these are reducing as well. And I have a video to just show sort of the happy side of all of this.
These are chairs of joy.
How was that?
Great.
Good.
I haven't wanted to move my ankle in 14 years.
So that man, even though a lot of us would say he has a lot of reasons to maybe feel sad about his situation, he's still really so enthusiastic, and you can tell that this has really made a huge difference in his life to be able to walk again and actually feel like he can walk and be like that again. So those are some of the current issues. In the future, I think it will become more about which enhancements we choose to get. Will people be very attached to the idea of still having flesh and bone? I personally think that if someone could enhance themselves to be faster and stronger biologically, that would personally be my choice. I think we still do have an attachment to being human, but that is hard to say what the mindset will be in the future, but that is a consideration as well. Economics. So right now, I think robotics is still quite expensive. If you go to the US and get a knee replacement, you're looking at a hospital charge of about $49,000, which is not cheap by any means. Luckily in Canada, we have good healthcare, yay. But, so that's the cost in the States. The replacement robotic leg, they can be $100,000 just for the hardware alone. So there's a pretty big gap right now in the economics of it. And it's hard to say where it will go in the future. Things like growing cell tissue could take a really long time, and that could drive up the price that it costs for someone to get biological enhancements. It will probably be based on similar things that products are based on right now: supply and demand, quality of the product, access to coverage would be huge. If insurance companies are willing to cover one method over another, that definitely gets taken into account, and regulatory approvals will probably drive some of this cost. I personally think that the cheapest enhancements will be ones that are done in vitro, as it can take the biology can take along with the natural growth. So it'll be simpler to enhance little tiny fetus babies than it will full-grown adults. As with most medical issues, there's always ethics, which is always a tough one to touch on. Trials, I can see, are currently and will have a lot of questions that we need to ask to successfully and ethically implement trials. So who has access to these new technologies once they sort of come about, and what happens after a trial is over? So if you go and you participate in a trial and you get a robotic leg, that's great, but after the trial, does the researcher get that technology back? If that researcher doesn't get that technology back, who is then responsible for patient care after that point? Does it burden the healthcare system, or is the researcher ultimately responsible for any care that's needed and upgrades? Current and near future technologies of limb repairs and replacements for people that need them, I think, are currently a bit of a stopgap to fully enhanced robotic and biological modifications for those that can afford to have them in the future. There will likely be three types of people: people that elect to do nothing, people that elect to biologically enhance themselves, and people that elect to robotically enhance themselves. And which of these end up going to the elite? So will the elite be those that have robotic enhancements or biological enhancements? Or will the elite choose to do nothing and just want everyone around them to be physically superior, so that don't know, they can do work for them. I suspect, given the choice, like I said previously, most people that can afford to will choose biological enhancements because they would like to stay more human, but that is sort of a question that I think as this progresses, the future will hold. And robotics will go into people that need them for maybe more task-based jobs or functions. Like if you had someone that had to go through sewage all day, they might want stainless steel limbs so that they're not at risk for having an infection. Or if you're an electrician, if we still have electricians, maybe you want hands that are made of non-conductive material so you don't risk electrocuting yourself. Also, the military. The impact on the military isn't something I want to get into in great detail because it's not really my area of strength, but I do want to mention it just so that we don't overlook it, because there's definitely considerations for that. There are questions that we'll need to ask ourselves, like, will soldiers have the choice to enhance themselves or not? Or when you sign up to be part of a military, is that just something that you take with it, that you might have to be enhanced in a way that you are not necessarily for? What happens after the service? Do the people get to keep the technology? Will the soldiers want to keep the technology? So those are questions as well. What about threats? I don't think that it will be a threat to our existence, because currently technology allows us to wipe each other out if we so choose. But I think it could be risky for certain cultures. So if certain countries or cultures get this technology before others, their military might be so superior that they can just, if they choose to, take over other militaries and cultures as well. Hopefully that wouldn't happen, but it's definitely something that we need to consider when developing these technologies. So I saw this show the other day that I'd recommend people watching. It's Stephen Hawking's Brave New World. They'd have different segments. This one was called Designer Humans. And there was just one clip that sort of summed up a lot of what I thought really well. The whole episode is on YouTube if you're interested. It is a super cool episode, talked a lot about the stuff that we've discussed in this class. Aside from what I've talked about today, I want to say that it should be noted that limb enhancement and robotics are just a small part of a very big picture when we talk about enhancing us to be superhuman. Issues and considerations that I've sort of presented here can be extrapolated upon to talk about cognitive enhancements, motor functions, social skills, mind augmentations, anything that you could enhance in the future. And I think all of these taken together will allow us to have a new path of evolution outside of natural selection. And these breakthroughs will take us on a journey to becoming something more than the humans we currently are today. So on that note, that's all I've got. Does anybody have any questions?
So, you know, there's something we often talk about in this course, and that's the idea that some things are just wrong. You know, you can't explain why they're wrong, but they just seem wrong. And here you can think of all the number of possible enhancements is just endless, right? And some of them would probably seem logical to us and like justified, and others not. So who do you see making those decisions? Are those society's decisions, government's decisions, industry's decisions? Who do you think will end up deciding, of all the millions of enhancements and different ways of extending human being capabilities, which paths will we actually take? How will those decisions be made, do you think?
I think originally, like sort of stepping from now to the future, a lot of that will have to do with starting small. Like there's a lot of military investment into robotics for amputees, so that I think will govern the technology initially. But I think once it gets to the point where everything maybe becomes a bit more open source and more people are able to implement technology, I think what will likely govern the enhancement side of things is what people want. So if there is a want for, I don't know, if you want a tentacle for an arm for whatever reason, I think you could probably find some company that would make you a tentacle for an arm. But initially, I think the military will have a lot of drive and where the technology goes, and medical research, especially in terms of tissue engineering, that will probably drive it initially. But once it gets to that point, I think.
So in society, a lot of it will be fads, right? Just arbitrary choices, not made based on logic, but just that a large number of people suddenly think it's very cool to do a certain kind of enhancement.
Well, you look at, there's the Cat Man. I don't know if any of you have seen him, but he's sort of enhanced his facial features. He's got whiskers. He's got the little, I don't know what you call that, that cats have. There's the guy that has tried to make himself look more reptilian, and he shaves down his teeth into these points. So there's already things that people do, not technologically, that a lot of us think are maybe a bit out there. But there's still people that are doing it. So I think, yeah, those fads will occur, and you'll have people that do really weird seeming stuff. No matter.
Yeah, so they're like the top 10 songs, top 100 songs, maybe they'll be the top 10 enhancements, top 100 enhancements, and they'll change, and it'll depend. They'll be different in Asian cultures and Western cultures.
It'll be like the leg warmers and bell bottoms of the future. We'll look back and think, what was I thinking?
Yeah. Okay.
So in terms of healthy people looking to get like a boost or replace their limbs, so would it be kind of like an add-on, or would it be like a complete replacement where you have to remove your physiological like leg and just completely?
I think probably initially it would be, so if we're talking about you have a really bad knee or really bad ankle and you get to the point where you elect to take a robotic one instead, I think initially it will probably be you're mostly fully replacing it with a robotic part, but I think as technology progresses, the two will sort of start to integrate a bit better. So perhaps you can surgically remove the bone and some of the tissue around the bone, and then kind of open up, put something new robotic in, and then close it all up. I think as technology progresses, the two can become more integrated, but
yeah, I would see more people doing it if it's an add-on rather than telling people you have to remove your leg. And then...
But I think it's really hard for someone, and maybe some people here have injuries that I don't even know about, but for someone like me who has a healthy knee and I can run and jump and do all of these things that I want to do, it's really easy for me to say, oh, well, why would you ever cut your leg off and replace it with a robotic one? Because I'm not limited by not being able to do the things I want to do. So for some people, even though it seems extreme, it may improve their life to the point that that would be worth it for them. It's hard to say.
I wonder if we're ever going to have to face the problem of enhancement syndrome. That is, some individuals who have opted for an enhancement has to deal with the rest of us that will do everything in their power to keep them from getting ahead. So that in effect, the notion of enhancement itself raises a whole cluster of issues in society and in the way it's going to handle this.
Sorry, I'm not sure if there's a,
Well, it's like we think about fairness now, right? You know, equality and fairness. The types of enhancements that you're talking about are naturally making us unequal and making society unfair, right?
I think society's already unfair, though. I don't think that's anything new. Like, yeah, the unfairness will probably be more visible, but even you look at university education, it's accessible to all, but people that have parents that are willing to pay for them and have been brought up in a certain financial situation definitely have an edge over those who don't. It's not like life is already fair and everybody is equal to start out with, so.
No, it's not that. The issue is that every kind of enhancement that we are going to provide for people is going to cost a fair amount of money. Mm-hmm. And there are other people who are going to say that enhancement not only puts me at a disadvantage, but it is my tax dollars that are paying for your enhancement. I will not allow that, and I will do everything I can to thwart your achievement. I mean, that's the way that societies work, and so.
Right, but who says the enhancements are being paid for by tax dollars? If I decide to go get a boob job tomorrow, your tax dollars aren't paying for it. So why do we automatically assume that taxpayers' dollars are going to enhancements? Yeah, initially the technology will come from being funded by tax dollars, but that's because those are for people that actually need them. So I don't think it's necessary. Maybe you're right, maybe tax dollars will fund it, but I don't think it's fair to say that that's the automatic way it will go. And there might be a lot of pushback from the general public, but I mean, I can't see that stopping.
Well, your argument that enhancements like this are, tax neutral is false. Because in fact, all that kind of scientific development is pretty well comes out of tax dollars now. So unless the situation is going to change dramatically, all these kinds of enhancements are going to be funded by the public. And moreover, in a Canadian system where we, health-wise, we provide funding for everybody for equal health opportunities, it's pretty obvious where these kinds of enhancements would come from. So I don't find your argument very convincing.
Well, I respectfully disagree.
The daily problem I can see with enhancements, the whole idea is all of us have some kind of competition between human beings, be it sports or, academic competition, getting grades in a certain course or something, where we accept now that, yeah, there's some unfairness, that some are naturally more suited, some people are taller, stronger, genetically, but basically it's a pretty level playing field. So we're now talking about making this an uneven playing field, not a level playing field for any competition you can think about, right? That you can have an enhancement that makes you naturally better at that. And so it changes the kind of formula of what life is all about. If you're looking forward to going out and playing a game, but if there's somebody who's enhanced and like 100 times better than anybody else, and yet still, so that person's gonna always win, So same with grades in school. Right now, there are, in theory, cognitive enhancement drugs you can take that are not very widely used. But suppose there was an absolute guarantee that if you had a neural implant of a certain specific type, that you would perform much better in courses than people who didn't. I think that time is probably coming. So whether you consider the funding issue to be the big issue or just the way your interaction with other human beings is every single day, where you're in a group and you're doing things together and there's a certain natural, competitiveness to do better. And some people have an enhancement that makes it much easier for them. So I don't know what the final outcome of that will be. Other thoughts? So, okay,
Neither
well,
do I.
Thank you very much.